Jim Collins is here. He is the co-author of Built to Last and author of Good to Great. Both of these business books are national bestsellers. He is also a teacher to leaders throughout the corporate and social sectors. Formerly a faculty member of Stanford University Graduate School of Business, he now works from his management research lab in Boulder, Colorado. I am pleased to have him back at this table because once in Aspen, Colorado, we did a conversation that we recorded at that time, and that tape, as Jim knows better than I, has found its way around to more places than I ever imagined.
It certainly has.
So, but fear not that we might touch on some things. I mean, it's hard to talk to you about without talking about rock climbing.
That's true.
So whether it's this conversation or that conversation,
that's right.
At some point we'll get to rock climbing.
Very good.
Tell me about not companies going from good to great, but individuals.
Oh, individuals. Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that because people have often asked, how do I explain the reach and kind of success of our work, given that they're supposedly business books? And I've puzzled on this myself because they've certainly far exceeded any expectations I would have ever had. And I think the reason in many ways is our questions are not business questions. They're human questions. Like the question, I mean, the question of good to great is a deeply human question.
Yes,
it's the question of basically saying, look, if you didn't have the right start in life, does that set you for life? If you wake up midway through your life and you only have a good life, can you take control of your own destiny and create a great life? I think people resonate with the notion of an inflection. And so when you think about people, and all of us are kind of on a constant struggle of good to great, but I've learned something very interesting. Let me just share with you a little story that's back from when we were doing the research on good to great. I had an executive who asked if we could take their company out of the book. This was on the positive side of the ledger, because, you know, we always have the good to greats or the great companies, we have the direct comparisons. And I said, well, you're a publicly traded company, you beat the market by some huge amount, I think it was 15 times the market, you're extraordinarily successful, I'm sorry, ball game, data's in, you went from good to great, you're in the book. So there was this pause, and he said, well, I'm sort of disappointed to hear that. And I was puzzled, and I said, well, why? And he said, the moment we begin to think of ourselves as great, we will have lost it. Yeah. And I don't want us or our people to pick up a copy of your book and
say,
think,
we're great.
We're great. And in many ways, greatness is this elusive thing. Good to great means you're always only good.
Yeah. It also means it's always a journey.
It's always a journey. It's always what's next. You're up. Every time you think you're at the top, there's another mountain.
What's been the signal moments in that journey for you?
Oh, I have a number of crystalline ones. You know, my own upbringing was pretty turbulent, which actually kind of planted the seed of some new research I'm working on that I think goes back to that early turbulence.
Well, tell me about that first.
About the
planting the seeds, yeah.
Well, where I grew up, in the first part of my upbringing, I grew up in an environment that had a lot of instability in it, and I began to realize that the world is not always safe ground. There's unpredictable volatility, and it planted a seed of a question in my brain, which didn't emerge until after the last time we were together, which is, what separates those who prevail in the face of all odds, in environments characterized by instability, insecurity, uncertainty, discontinuous events, and not just endure them, not just survive them, but to prevail. And how do you retain control of your own destiny when circumstances conspire to rip that control away from you? And it's interesting, because the last time we were together, you said to me, you asked, where's the next question going to come from? And I said something along the lines of, it'll come from a challenging student and it will connect to something in my life. And so I was doing these things for venture capital-backed companies funded by wonderful people like our friend John Doerr. And I kept getting the same question from these venture capital-backed companies that were along the lines of, gee, Good to Great and Built to Last are all very interesting, Jim, but how does it apply to us? And I would say, well, you're trying to build a great company, and they would say, Jim, it's after the bubble burst. Our technology might get obsoleted, or somebody might beat us to the patent. Our funding's going to run out. The markets have melted down. You don't understand. It's out of our control. We're going to die. What does your research have to say to us? And I would think about it for a minute and then say something like, oh, bummer, right? Just not very helpful.
Yeah. It's not a pretty picture.
Not a pretty picture. And that seed is what that question came up over and over again and came back around to. I think that that is our world today. Our world on a macro scale. The Cold War was an artificial sense of stability, an artificial sense of predictability. The natural state of human affairs is unpredictability, uncertainty, events out of your control. July 1914 to August 1914. No one could have predicted. No one could have predicted the market meltdown in 1929. This is our life. And the question before us, when facing those events, when facing things out of your control, is how do you build greatness anyway? This is the question that circles all the way back to growing up. It's a personal question, a human question, which of course we will answer through the lens of studying companies, because that's where we have data and all of that. But it's not a business question.
I mean, and tell me how you go about finding sort of the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, so how do you take that question? Yeah. So I have a wonderful colleague named Morton Hansen, who I'm doing this current research with. And it's just kind of an interesting time for us to be talking, because as you know, we think of ourselves as like Curious George. We want to look under the yellow hat just to see what's there. We're looking under the yellow hat, but we don't know the answers yet. So it's kind of midstream. Morton and I said, let's find companies that are like little specks on the side of Everest in 26,000 or 28,000 or 30,000 foot environments where, unlike base camp, if a storm hits you, you're going to be okay. But these are the environments where the storms move fast, they're big, they're out of your control, they can hit you really fast. And if you aren't prepared, they can really hurt you or kill you. So what we did was, Morton said, let's start with IPOs. So we took all 20,400 publicly traded companies from 1971, a massive data set, huge, and we systematically sorted down to find which were legitimate IPOs, then of those to find the 50 best performing IPOs since 1971, based on how well they did 15 years out, then those that show sustainability, and then those that prevailed from that position of vulnerability to greatness in the most severe, difficult, out of your control environments, and yet they prevailed. Compare them to others that were in the same environment that didn't prevail.
And so let's ask the question, who are the top 5?
Well, I'll give you some of the examples of companies that made it. They're like, let me come back to just one little data point right off the front. If you go back to 1972, and you could invest $1 in every publicly traded company in 1972, hold that dollar all the way out to 2002 for 30 years. Take out your money and then rank order the performance. Who comes out number 1? Well, the obvious candidates come to mind: Berkshire Hathaway, GE, Intel, so forth. They're all in there. Yeah. Walmart. The number 1, according to this survey by Money Magazine, and our numbers seem to support their numbers, the number 1 best performing stock of all publicly traded stocks over a 30-year period from 1972 to 2002 is, of all things, an airline.
Amazing. Now,
isn't that just delightful? It's an airline. And now think of everything that happens at Southwest. Think of everything that happened since 1972. You want to talk about a high on Everest environment.
How many airlines have gone out of business?
Gone out of business, but fuel
Pan Am,
shocks.
Eastern, et cetera, et cetera,
That's right.
et cetera.
Deregulation, fuel shocks,
right.
Interest rate spikes, 9/11, wars. And yet they are the number 1. And another company that was on the same mountain at the same time with the same resources, with the same opportunities, Pacific Southwest Airlines, had everything else going for it. It didn't survive on the mountain. Why? Why did this one prevail when there's so much out of its control and the other didn't? This is the essence of our quest, because in many ways our life for all of us is increasingly, or at least it feels increasingly, like that set of contingencies outside of our control.
Some wag would say Kellner.
Well, he was one of 4 CEOs in the history.
Somebody else would say I don't know what. Tell me. Give me some early indications of what the answers are.
You know that wonderful Sherlock Holmes story, Silver Blaze, where Holmes is talking about the clue to the case, and Watkins says, Watson says, what was the clue to the case? And Holmes said, well, it was the dog, the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. And well, the dog didn't do anything in the nighttime. That was the curious incident. The dog didn't bark. And you would have expected it would, so therefore it must have been somebody who knew the dog.
Right.
Okay, wonderful story. In our research, our first clues are the dogs that don't bark. We may not know who the culprit is, but we have some suspicious non-answers. So, for example, in this case, the common view, widely held, of Southwest is it innovated its way to success. It had something that no one else had, that it was first with a pioneering idea.
What did it have that no one else had?
It didn't.
I didn't think so.
This is the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Okay, you go back to late 1960s, and you would think, well, they must have come up with this wonderful idea. They must have been the one. Okay, I'll give you two dogs that didn't bark. I don't know what they mean yet, but they're very interesting. Southwest didn't innovate anything. Their original business plan was essentially copy PSA in Texas. They went to California, visited Pacific Southwest Airlines, which at the time was non-competing because of deregulation. And according to two sources, and I want to corroborate it from a third because I found it so astounding, they returned to Texas with some of the operating binders, gratis from PSA, and started Southwest. It was a complete copy, the culture, the model, the short routes, the whole bit. And then here's the other interesting thing. Okay, not only that, so PSA was the innovator, it didn't win. So what about this idea that it's the innovators that win in changing worlds? Now, here's the next point that's extremely interesting, a dog that just surprised me. I don't know what it means yet. If you look at Southwest's operating model in the late 1970s, roughly 10 points in it, and it's basic. We talked before about the hedgehog concept, the one big thing, and what their hedgehog concept is they could be the best low-cost, high-spirit airline, steadily increasing profit per fuselage. That's what they understood, and they built on that and built on that with this great culture. If you look at the operating model that came from that in the late 1970s, and you compare it to 2005, 9 of 10 points are the same.
And what's the 10th?
The 10th is that they started doing longer haul routes.
Okay.
Okay, but here's the point. If somebody were to come and say, who is going to most succeed in a world characterized by an immense amount of change, instability, discontinuous, radical events, you would say,
who maintains the same operating model.
You wouldn't say it's the ones that, you would say it's the ones who change the best.
Right.
We are finding PSA changed in response to that environment. It died.
It changed in response to the environment. It forgot its fundamentals.
That's correct. And so one of the things we're learning, one of the things we're learning is that there's some very, very deep wisdom about not changing in the face of dramatic change. We always think the main question is, how do you bring about change in the absence of a crisis? It turns out there's an equally important question that we didn't know before. How do you retain the discipline to not change your fundamentals in the presence of a crisis? So if a bunch of things happen to you, you have a model on the show, the world changes around you. How do you have the wisdom to not panic, to not change those fundamentals? This I find very, very interesting.
My answer was, that's all I know.
That may be true for others as well. So we're beginning to see that some of the things you would expect would be the answers, that the most innovative, the most nimble, the most radically changing, that the proper response to a radically changing world is radical change.
Yeah, but I mean, let me just test this
yes,
idea.
Yes, I don't know the answer yet. All I know is that it's not turning out to be that answer.
Well, it seems to me that it would depend on what your fundamentals are.
That's
9 out of 10. And how strong they are and how good they are and whether they're right. Let me suggest other things. Bill Gates and Microsoft.
Yep.
Bill Gates was late coming to a recognition of Internet.
That's correct.
He went on one of his famous...
That's right, read his white papers.
Yeah, and read all these papers that people prepared for him, and he came back and issued a huge memo.
That's right.
And said, basically, we have to turn this ship around.
Yep.
We are being engulfed by something new, and if we don't respond to it, we will be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Now that's exactly. Now you can argue in terms of the language you used, whether that was him simply doing a fundamental that he had already ingrained in that company, or whether that was violating your principle by responding to something in a crisis.
I want to be really clear. We don't have a principle yet that comes from this. We know it's not just reacting to the world and maintaining your bearings. Microsoft is in the study. So they're one of the companies we will be studying. We haven't
because it's a successful IPO.
It's one of the 10 great ICOs in an environment characterized by a tremendous amount of.
Now, how long is it going to take you to do this study?
We're only 3 years into it now.
What do you mean only 3 years?
Yeah,
is this like 5 years or 10?
Oh, yeah, 5 to 6 years to do it right.
Yeah, and out of that comes a book and an analysis and.
Depends on if we have answers that are worth putting in a book.
Ah.
I always withhold judgment because you don't do a book just to do a book. You pursue questions.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And if you have answers, you then share those answers with your students. And if a book is the best vehicle, we will make it a book. I think that we will find some very, very interesting things because in the end, I do believe, this is what I believe very deeply. Many of our presumptions about how you deal with that kind of a world might be dangerous. Just as, remember that wonderful show, the documentary Fog of War?
Right.
Good
Robert
people,
McNamara.
That's right. Good people operating under a flawed theory, the domino theory, led to bad outcomes. We believe that the theories might be wrong. We want to know what are the right theories.
Theories and assumptions.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Ya volvemos con más. Jim Collins, a solas con Charlie Rose, en Management TV.
I ask about knowing that there were 4, 5, 6 things that this administration and the British, UK administration, Tony Blair and others, accepted as assumptions about why they were going to war. Some people believe some of them, some people believe none of them, some people think they changed in midstream, whatever. But I always ask the people the following kinds of things, because if in fact everything had gone right, were those achievable objectives? Or was there something about the idea? No matter how good the execution, it would not have worked as well as they expected. You know, let's assume the jury's still out. But it's a very, very difficult, and everybody that's been involved on either side, believing it was the right thing to do, believing that it was impossible to do, both sides realize it's been very, very difficult, and this is a very difficult time right now, and they're talking about drawing down troops. My point about this is simply, you know, was it doable if everything had gone right? You know, and you get interesting questions in terms of that. You know.
Well, and I think that one of the things that
and should it have been done?
Yeah, that question historians will, I'm sure, struggle over. It's not an area I have great expertise in. But I do know that the best we've studied always, they rarely change their fundamentals, but they always, always, always challenge their assumptions.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And ask questions of themselves.
Constantly.
Put literally a list of questions in your in your in your drawer there. Pull them out. And, you know, what's the answer to this? And what if this? And what if this? And what if we're wrong here? What are the consequences? Lance Armstrong was here. I am convinced that the philosophy and the strategy of Lance Armstrong, in terms of how he approached cancer, a terrible case of cancer. It had spread to his brain, to his lung, everything. How he approached it, and the thing that he was most interested in were 2 things: data, 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 data. Information was king for him, and he wanted to know what today's information said about yesterday's information. All of that. He took, and he said this to me, the same idea when he started back racing. It's just that he saw things in a very different way because of what he learned from the battle against cancer, and that was life and death, and therefore those principles became much more a part of him. But it was the same kind of strategy. It is the power of information and the power of executing them in a significantly devoted regimen.
When we took apart, you talk about, I mean, Lance is a good degree.
These are the principles that took him to
to
conquering cancer are the same principles, fundamentals.
That's right. And one of the principles that jumps out from all of our work is the idea of disciplined people who engage in disciplined thought, who take disciplined action. And that it starts with disciplined people, And then disciplined thought means data and rigor and thinking and questions and challenging and understanding versus bravado, translated into relentless, consistent, disciplined action. That is a framework that applies to anything. It applies to art. It applies to writing. It applies, I imagine, to bicycle racing, car racing, rock climbing, life, business, disciplined people who engage in disciplined thought, who take disciplined action.
And people tell me that used to have dinner in Paris with Picasso, that he would leave at dinner, he would go back and paint.
Yeah.
Every night.
Yeah.
Every night.
Yeah, it's a great way to battle depression.
All right, let me just talk in the remaining time we have. What have you learned from your obsession, devotion to rock climbing? Because we're talking about the same.
Well, you know, we're talking about disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action. I remember when I was a kid, you know, people would say to me, well, you know, you got to learn from your mistakes, and it's part of growing up. And I remember thinking, my sport is rock climbing. You don't always get a chance to learn from your mistakes. Yeah. Rock climbing is a place where I relax because it is so intense. And it has taught me a few lessons. For example, one of the lessons is never confuse luck with competence, because if your luck runs out, you might die. A number of years ago, I was on a climb when I was young, and I always just thought I was really good, until one day my luck ran out. And I had a friend up on a cliff. We ended up making some bad mistakes. We had to rescue him in the middle of the night because of mistakes that I made. And both of us nearly died. We had this epic rescue with lights and helicopters, and it etched itself in my mind as a lesson of always presume that much of what you've done might actually turn out to have been as much luck as your own competence, because if you're wrong about it and your luck runs out, you might end up there very stranded. Another lesson, and something that carries through to me today, is how to think about success. I like to think of the difference between failure and failure. As I get older, I can't climb the hardest climbs. So what's the battle? Battle's what happens in here. And so there's this thing I've come up with called failure and failure. Here's the difference. If you look inside my Palm Pilot, you'll see a list of climbing success ratio, successes and failures.
Right.
But here's the interesting thing. When you look at the successes, only about half of them are getting to the top. Why is that? Because there's this thing in rock climbing called the on-site. Now there's the red point, which means you've been on the route before, you know it, you work it till you get it. You get one chance at an on-site. You go up on the climb, and if you fall off, the rope catches you, that's it, on-site's over, now it's red point forever. One chance at an on-site, but you don't know what the holds are going to be like. You don't know if that pocket you're looking at is going to be a good pocket or a bad pocket, if that hold up there is going to be slopey or in-cut. And then you start up the climb, and you're climbing along, and the clock is ticking because your arms are starting to run out of gas. The lactic acid goes, you can only do so many pull-ups before you fall off. And you hit a point of uncertainty, and there comes this choice. You're scared because you might be taking a further fall the higher you go up. You're uncertain because you don't know the next holds. You're in pain because your arms are full of lactic acid. And the problem isn't unfolding quickly. You're making a set of decisions under duress. And there is this instantaneous moment of failure or failure. To fail means you let go. You let go mentally. You let go emotionally. You let go physically from the walls. You step back down a ways and take a controlled fall. Failure means when the odds of making the next move are going down from 80% to 70 to 60 to 50 to 40 because of all the factors. You never let go. You make a full 100% committed attempt to go up. And if you fall, you have truly fallen honorably. You did not let go. And only you know if you broke. Only you know if it was a 100% over everything you were facing attempt to go up. If I didn't make it to the top, but I went to failure, that's success. And for me, much of life is a series of choices.
Between failure and failure?
Failure and failure. Failure and failure. Sometimes you make it to the top, but if you fail, did you go to failure? Did you go honorably?
Do you believe we learn more from success or failure?
Oh, failure.
Do you?
For sure.
Oh, is that easy? I mean, that's so obvious.
No, it's not obvious. But one of the things we learned in our research.
Let me just ask this question. See, I mean, I think about athletics.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I played tennis this morning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, I think more about what I did right teaching me than if I hit the ball beyond or into the net or you know, I mean, I'm not sure that, I realize most people say what you just said. I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not sure that reaching out to do something and it being successful and then finding out what the pattern was that brought you that is as important as understanding why it didn't work, because you don't necessarily know why it didn't work.
Let me answer this right and go to the data on this one. When you study the long course of history of companies and you compare great ones to good ones, the ones that made it versus the ones that didn't, one of the...
Well, let me interrupt you 1 second. One of the, hold that point. You're studying the ones that made it. You're studying success when you're looking at the IPO thing, aren't you?
No, Charlie. This is a very, very important part about our work. We are always... One of my mentors was a fellow named Jerry Porras, who came up with this beautiful thing called the matched pair method that I think is one of the real contributions to how we're going to crack even most social questions. The matched pair method basically says you don't want to just study successes. You want to find others that were in the same environment with the same opportunities, with the same potential outcomes that did not make it. So built to last.
Southwest and Pacific Southwest.
Southwest PSA, GE versus Westinghouse, Kimberly-Clark versus Scott Paper, and all of our research, we always have the comparison. Always have the comparison. And so we're always contrasting the two. And so, for example, if you take a look, one of my favorite professors from graduate school, Robert Bergelman, we put a name on it. We called it Bergelman's Law. One of the greatest mistakes, greatest dangers, is to be successful without being clear about why you were successful in the first place. And what you are absolutely right about that, but how sometimes do you know that? It's a combination of both successes and failures. And when I took a look, for example, at one of the biggest failures in one of the companies we're studying now, it's very interesting because the company had to wake up to a truth, which was that people didn't like their industry. So what I would say is you learn from both.
Yeah.
Can we very briefly hit one thing?
Sure, please.
We have become very, very passionate about our work reaching outside of business. And first of all, your show helped our work reach roughly probably 30 to 50% of our readers now are non-business people. Police chiefs, education leaders, people in nonprofits, orchestras, and it's wonderful. I've come to see that if we only have great companies, we're merely going to have a prosperous society. We're not going to have a great one. Economic means, economic growth, and power. These are merely the means. They are not the definition of a great nation. And we have become very passionate about having our work reach into the social sectors. And one of the things I've come very much clear to see, that business thinking is not the answer for how to make the rest of the sectors of society great. What we really need is a framework of greatness. What separates great from good, not what just makes businesses tick. And I'd like to thank you for helping our work reach those people who are in all these different walks of life so that we can have a great nation, not just a great economy.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's something that interests me as well, and all of the interaction between a variety of disciplines, and finding the common threads that make a nation and an individual, and give us the power to deal with a whole range of very complex issues. Jim Collins, I should say this book is Good to Great. The other one was Built to Last. I have both of them here. He provides provocative questions and then goes in search of the answers. Thank you.
You're very welcome.